The evening rush at Blue Moon Restaurant was in full swing. Rain tapped against the tall windows, creating a cozy atmosphere inside the warmly lit dining room. Among the bustling servers, May moved with grace, balancing 3 plates of steaming food along her arm. She had mastered this dance years ago, weaving between tables, remembering dozens of orders, and keeping a gentle smile on her face even when her feet ached. "Here's your mushroom risotto," she said, placing the dish in front of a businessman who barely looked up from his phone. "And the grilled salmon for you, ma'am. Can I get you anything else?" The grand piano in the corner caught her eye, as it did 100 times each day. Its polished black surface gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, waiting for the evening's entertainment to begin. Sometimes, when no one was looking, Mai would let her fingers drift along its edge while cleaning nearby tables, feeling the smooth wood beneath her fingertips. 10 years ago, she'd have been on track to become a concert pianist. Her teachers said she had a rare gift, the ability to make the piano sing with emotion that moved people to tears. But life had other plans. Her mother's illness came suddenly, and with 2 younger brothers still in school, someone had to step up. Between hospital bills and daily expenses, her family needed steady income more than they needed a musician. "Table 7 needs more water," called out Ray, the head waiter, snapping Mai back to reality. She quickly grabbed a pitcher and made her rounds, chatting with customers about their days. Most of them were regulars who knew her as the cheerful waitress who remembered their usual orders and always had a kind word to share. What they didn't know was how she spent her evenings after work. In her tiny apartment, she had an old electronic keyboard with weighted keys, not quite the same as a real piano, but enough to keep her fingers nimble. She would play with headphones on, lost in Chopin and Beethoven until the early hours of the morning, letting the music wash away the stress of the day. The restaurant's owner, Mr. Wu, was particularly proud of the grand piano. He'd bought it at an auction, telling anyone who would listen about its history, how it had once belonged to a famous concert hall. Every evening, a different local pianist would perform, filling the restaurant with classical music that complemented the upscale atmosphere. Tonight's pianist was running late. Mai could see Mr. Wu checking his watch with growing concern. She wanted to tell him that she could help, that she could step in and play. But the thought made her hands tremble. It had been so long since she performed for anyone. What if she wasn't good enough anymore? What if people laughed at the waitress pretending to be a musician? "Me, orders up for table 12. The kitchen chef called out. She pushed the thoughts aside and hurried to collect the plates. This was her life now, practical, reliable, responsible. Yet every note that drifted from the piano during dinner service tugged at something deep inside her, like a thread trying to unravel a tightly wound spool. As she served the food, an elderly customer commented on the empty piano. "Such a shame," the woman said. "I always look forward to the music here." Maya nodded politely, but inside, her heart was playing a symphony of its own. Maybe someday, she thought. Maybe someday she would find the courage to sit down at that piano again. For now, though, there were tables to clear and customers to serve, and she had learned to find her own kind of music in the rhythm of restaurant life. It was nearly midnight when Mai finished wiping down the last table at Blue Moon Restaurant. The dining room was eerily quiet compared to the bustling dinner service just hours before. Only the soft hum of the refrigerators in the kitchen and the occasional car passing outside broke the silence. "You can head home now," Ray called from the back office. "I'll finish up the paperwork." "Just a few more minutes," Mai replied, her voice echoing in the empty space. "I want to make sure everything's perfect for tomorrow's breakfast shift." But that wasn't the real reason she wanted to stay. Every night, she watched that beautiful grand piano sitting in the corner, untouched after the evening's performer left. Tonight's pianist had played all the crowd favorites, simple, pleasant tunes that made nice background music. But Maya knew the piano could do so much more. In the right hands, it could tell stories, paint pictures, make people feel things they couldn't put into words. She glanced around the restaurant. Ray was busy in the office, and the kitchen staff had already left. The cleaning crew wouldn't arrive for another hour. Her fingers itched with a familiar longing. Just one song, she thought. What harm could it do? Mai approached the piano slowly, as if it might disappear like a mirage. She lifted the cover and ran her fingers lightly over the keys, not pressing down, just feeling their smooth, cool surface. The last time she touched a real grand piano was at her final recital before leaving music school. Taking a deep breath, she sat down on the bench. It felt like coming home. Her hands found their position naturally, muscle memory from thousands of hours of practice taking over. She began to play softly at first. Chopin's Nocturne in B-flat minor, a piece that had always felt like it was written for quiet moments like this. As the music filled the room, everything else faded away. She forgot about her aching feet, the stack of bills waiting at home, the weight of responsibilities she carried. There was only the music, flowing through her fingers like water, each note crystal clear and the perfect acoustics of the empty restaurant. The piece built gradually, growing more complex and emotional. Mai swayed slightly as she played, her entire body involved in bringing the music to life. This wasn't background music. This was her heart spilling out through her fingertips, telling the story of dreams deferred but not forgotten. She was so lost in the music that she didn't notice the office door opening. Ray stepped out, drawn by the unexpected sound. He stood in the doorway, completely still, not wanting to break the spell. In all the years he'd worked at Blue Moon, he'd never heard the piano sing like this. As Mai reached the most challenging part of the piece, her confidence grew. Her fingers danced across the keys, drawing out harmonies that seemed to hang in the air like starlight. The final section was a delicate cascade of notes, becoming softer and softer until they seemed to evaporate into the silence. For a moment after the last note faded, Mai sat perfectly still, eyes closed, not ready to let go of the magic. Then she heard clapping. Her eyes flew open to see not only Ray, but also Mr. Wu standing near the kitchen entrance, both staring at her with amazement. How long had they been there? Her face burned with embarrassment as she quickly stood up, nearly knocking over the piano bench. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, straightening her apron nervously. "I know I shouldn't have. I was just—" "How long?" Mr. Wu asked quietly, still looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. "How long what?" Mi's heart was racing. "How long have you been hiding this gift from us?" There was something in his voice she couldn't quite read. Not anger, but something else entirely. Mai looked down at her hands, the same hands that had just brought such beautiful music into the room. Hands that usually carried plates and wiped tables. "It's been 10 years since I really played," she whispered. "I didn't think I could anymore." The silence that followed felt heavier than any music. The next morning, Mai arrived at Blue Moon Restaurant earlier than usual, her stomach in knots. She hadn't slept much, replaying last night's events in her mind. Would she be in trouble for using the piano without permission? Maybe she should start looking for another job, just in case. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, making the empty tables glow. She was reaching for her apron when Mr. Wu's voice called from his office. "Mai, could you come in here for a moment?" She took a deep breath and walked to his office, where she found both Mr. Wu and Ray waiting. There was a strange energy in the room, not the tension she'd expected, but something more like excitement. "Please, sit down." Mr. Wu gestured to the chair across from his desk. "We need to talk about what happened last night." Mi's hands twisted in her lap. "I'm really sorry about using the piano without asking. It won't happen again." "That's actually exactly what we want to talk about." Ray jumped in, unable to contain his enthusiasm. "You see, Mrs. Lin, our regular evening pianist, just called this morning. She's moving to be closer to her grandchildren." Mr. Wu leaned forward, his eyes bright. "We've been thinking. The dinner crowd here, They enjoy nice background music. But what you played last night, that was something else entirely. That was art. Mai felt her cheeks warm at the compliment, but confusion crept in. I don't understand. We have a proposal for you, Mr. Wu continued. Keep your regular shifts during our busiest hours. We need your skills there. The customers love you. But 3 nights a week, during our quieter evening periods, we'd like you to play the piano. The world seemed to tilt slightly. Play. Here. In front of people. Ray smiled kindly. We pay you extra for the performances, of course. And you can start slowly, maybe just 1 night a week, until you feel comfortable. Mi's heart was racing. Images flashed through her mind, her old dreams of performing, the years of practice, her mother's proud face at recitals. Then came the harder memories, the hospital bills, her brother's tuition needs, the painful decision to leave music behind. I haven't performed in public for 10 years, she said quietly. I'm not sure I can anymore. What we heard last night says otherwise, Mr. Wu replied. Listen, my father had a saying. Talent is like a flower. It will grow wherever it finds light. Maybe this is your light, Mei. She looked down at her hands again, remembering how natural it had felt to play last night. But that was different. She'd been alone, or thought she was anyway. Could I think about it? Of course, Mr. Wu nodded. But don't think too long. Sometimes opportunities are like buses. You have to jump on when they come, or you might spend years waiting for the next one. As Mei left the office, her mind was spinning. The morning regulars would be arriving soon, wanting their coffee and breakfast. She needed to focus on that, on the job she knew she could do well. But as she moved through her familiar routine, setting tables, checking the coffee machines, greeting the early customers, her thoughts kept drifting to the piano. She imagined herself sitting there in the evening light, sharing the music she'd kept locked away for so long. The idea terrified her. And yet, during her break, she called her mother. Mom, something happened at work, she began, then told the whole story. There was a pause before her mother spoke. Your music teacher once told me something I never shared with you. She said when you played, it wasn't just notes. It was like you were giving people pieces of your heart. Maybe that's what the world needs more of right now. Mai looked across the restaurant at the piano, gleaming in the late morning sun. A customer had left a newspaper on their table, and the headline caught her eye. In troubled times, the healing power of music. Sometimes, she thought, the universe has a funny way of sending messages. After accepting Mr. Wu's offer, Mai spent every free moment practicing. Her tiny apartment filled with music late into the night as her fingers rediscovered their old strength on her electronic keyboard. But something was holding her back. Memories she'd pushed away for years kept surfacing, especially at night. One evening, while cleaning up after closing time, she found herself sitting at the restaurant's piano again. Instead of playing, she just sat there, lost in thought. The last time she performed in public was at the spring concert at her music school. She'd been halfway through Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata when she got the call. Her mother had collapsed at work. You're still here. Ray's voice startled her. He was carrying a stack of menus to the storage room. Just thinking, Mai replied, running her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them. You know, I used to practice 6 hours a day. My teacher said I could have played in concert halls someday. Ray set down the menus and pulled up a chair. What changed? Mai hadn't told this story in years, but somehow, in the quiet restaurant with its dimmed lights and empty tables, it felt right to share. My mom got sick, really sick. The doctor said she needed surgery, but our insurance wouldn't cover all of it. My brothers were still in high school. She paused, remembering those sleepless nights spent calculating bills and expenses. Someone had to step up. So you left music school, Ray finished quietly. I thought it would be temporary. Just a year or two, until things got better. Mai smiled sadly. But then 1 year became 5, and 5 became 10. Life just moved on. She pressed one key, letting a single note ring out in the empty room. The hardest part wasn't leaving school. It was watching my dreams slip away so quietly. No drama, no big moment of choice. Just gradually accepting that this was my life now. Ray was silent for a moment. "You know what I think?" he finally said. "I think sometimes life takes things away from us just to give them back later, when we're ready to appreciate them differently." Maya looked at him questioningly. "Think about it," he continued. 10 years ago, you were a student who could play beautifully. Now you're someone who understands struggle, who knows what it means to sacrifice for family. Maybe that will make your music even more powerful." His words struck something deep inside her. She thought about how differently she played now, how every note carried the weight of experience, of love and loss, and choosing to keep going. "My first performance is next week," she said softly. "I'm terrified." "Of playing?" "Of hoping again." The words came out before she could stop them. "What if I'm not good enough anymore? What if I've lost too much time?" Ray stood up and straightened the chairs around the nearby table. "You know what I've noticed about time? It's never really lost. It just becomes part of who we are." The next morning, Maya visited her mother before her shift. She found her in the small garden behind their house, tending to her flowers. "Mom," she said, sitting on the old wooden bench, "I'm going to play again. For real this time." Her mother's hands stilled in the dirt. She didn't turn around immediately, but when she did, her eyes were shining. "I kept all your old music books," she said. "They're in the box under your bed, right where you left them." That evening, Mai opened the dusty box for the first time in a decade. The sheet music was slightly yellowed, but her teenage self's pencil marks were still visible. Little notes about tempo, expression, feelings she wanted to convey. As she flipped through the pages, something fell out. A program from her last recital, with her name printed in bold letters. She ran her fingers over the printed words, remembering the girl who had written those notes, who had dreamed those dreams. Maybe Ray was right. Maybe all this time hadn't been lost at all. Maybe it had just been waiting, like seeds under winter snow, for the right moment to bloom. The evening of May's first performance arrived with an unexpected twist. The restaurant was completely full. Word had spread quickly among the regular customers about the waitress who would be playing piano, and curiosity had brought them in droves. "Breathe," Ray reminded her as she peeked through the kitchen door at the crowded dining room. "They're not critics. They're the same people you serve coffee to every day." But that was part of what made it so nerve-wracking. These people knew her as the reliable waitress who remembered their usual orders and asked about their families. What if they thought she was silly for trying to be something more? She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a simple black dress that her mother had insisted on buying her, saying every performer needed something special to wear. Now, in the bathroom mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned back her hair. 5 minutes, Mr. Wu called softly through the door. May closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about all the mornings she'd spent serving these people, all the evenings practicing alone in her apartment, all the years she'd kept her music hidden away like a precious secret. As she stepped into the dining room, the usual dinner chatter quieted. She saw familiar faces everywhere. The old couple who came in every Sunday morning, the businessman who always ordered extra pickles with his sandwich, the young mother who worked on her laptop in the corner booth. The walk to the piano felt like crossing an ocean. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. The silence in the room was complete now, waiting. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. Then she spotted her mother sitting near the back, next to her 2 brothers who had surprised her by showing up after their classes. Her mother gave a small nod, and suddenly May knew exactly what to play. She began with Debussy's Clair de Lune, not because it was the most impressive piece she knew, but because it was the one her mother had always loved best. The first notes floated out into the hushed room like drops of rain on still water. As she played, something magical happened. The restaurant, the audience, even her own nervousness, it all faded away. There was only the music, flowing through her fingers just as it had done in all those years of practice, all those late nights at home. The piece built gradually, like a flower opening in the morning sun. Mai felt herself swaying slightly with the rhythm, letting the music carry her. When she reached the climax of the piece, her fingers dancing across the keys in that familiar pattern, she heard a small gasp from someone in the audience. She moved seamlessly into her next piece, Chopin's Waltz in A minor. This had always been one of her favorites to practice, with its blend of melancholy and hope. As she played, she caught glimpses of the audience, people closing their eyes, others watching her hands in amazement, a few wiping away tears. What she didn't notice was the man sitting in the corner, taking notes on a small pad. He was a music critic from the local paper who had come in for dinner, not knowing there would be a performance. He hadn't planned to write about it, but as he listened, his pen moved across the paper of its own accord. The final piece in her program was the one she'd been practicing most, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. It was challenging, emotional, and exactly what she needed to express everything she'd kept inside for 10 years. When the last note faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the applause began. Not the polite clapping usually given to background music, but real applause, with cheers and whistles mixed in. Mai opened her eyes to see her mother crying openly, her brothers grinning proudly. Mr. Wu was beaming at the door to the kitchen, and Ray was giving her a thumbs up from behind the bar. But it was the faces of the regular customers that moved her most. They were looking at her with new eyes, as if finally seeing her completely. The businessman who never looked up from his phone was standing, clapping enthusiastically. The old couple was holding hands, smiling at her like proud grandparents. In that moment, May realized something important. She hadn't just been hiding her music all these years. She'd been hiding part of herself. And now, finally, she was whole again. The morning after her first performance, May arrived at work to find a newspaper on the counter. Ray pointed excitedly to an article in the arts section. Hidden gem. Restaurant server reveals extraordinary musical gift. The critic who had been dining at the restaurant had written a glowing review, praising her technical skill and emotional depth. Your phone's been ringing all morning, Mr. Wu said, holding up a stack of message slips. 3 local music schools want to talk to you about teaching. And some concert organizer left his card. Mai felt overwhelmed. She'd expected a few kind words from the regular customers, maybe some extra tips. She hadn't expected this. During her morning shift, customers kept showing her their phones. Someone had posted a video of her performance online, and it was spreading quickly. The comments were filled with amazement and support. This is what real talent looks like. Why isn't she playing in concert halls? Music can come from anywhere. An elderly woman who had been at last night's performance grabbed her hand as she served coffee. Dear, you made me remember what it felt like to fall in love with music for the first time. My granddaughter starts piano lessons next week. Would you consider teaching her? The requests kept coming. A local music school offered her a position teaching advanced students. A nearby church asked if she would perform at their holiday concert. A wedding planner wanted to book her for upcoming ceremonies. During her break, she called her mother. Mom, I don't know what to do. It's all happening so fast. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Remember when you were little and you used to put on concerts for your stuffed animals? You weren't playing for fame then. You were playing because the music lived inside you and needed to come out. That afternoon, a young girl came into the restaurant with her parents. She looked at May with wide eyes and asked, Are you the piano lady from the video? I wanted to quit my lessons, but after watching you play, can you teach me how to make music like that? Mai felt something shift inside her. She thought about all the teachers who had encouraged her over the years, who had seen her potential and helped it grow. Maybe this was her chance to do the same for others. But balancing everything proved challenging. Between her regular shifts, her new evening performances at the restaurant, and the growing number of students wanting lessons, she barely had time to breathe. Some days, she would teach piano for 3 hours after her morning shift, then perform in the evening, falling into bed exhausted but happy. The restaurant had evolved, too. People now made reservations specifically for the nights when she played. Mr. Wu had to hire extra staff to handle the crowds. Regular customers who used to come for quiet dinners now brought friends and family to hear her play. One evening, as she was practicing a new piece for an upcoming performance, her youngest brother stopped by. He watched her play for a while, then said, "You know what's different now? You're smiling while you play. You never used to do that before." He was right. Before, music had been about perfection, about proving herself. Now it was about sharing something she loved, about connecting with people in a way words couldn't. The biggest surprise came when a video of her playing Liszt's La Campanella went viral. A famous music festival organizer saw it and reached out through the restaurant. He wanted her to perform at next month's Spring Music Festival, a prestigious event that usually featured only professional musicians. That night, alone in her apartment, Maya sat at her old electronic keyboard. She played a simple melody she had composed years ago, back when she first started learning piano. The keys were worn from years of practice, the sound quality nowhere near as good as the restaurant's grand piano. But it had been her faithful companion through all those silent years, keeping her dreams alive when she thought they were lost forever. Her phone buzzed with another message, someone else wanting lessons, another opportunity to perform. But for now, she just played, letting the music say everything her heart was too full to express in words. The day of the Spring Music Festival arrived with perfect weather, sunshine warming the outdoor amphitheater where Mai would perform. As she walked backstage, she passed posters featuring famous pianists who would be playing that day. Her name was there too, listed as special guest performer. Nervous? Asked her mother, who had come to help her prepare. A little, Mai admitted, smoothing her new concert dress. But a different kind of nervous than before. She thought about how much had changed in the past few months. Her piano students had grown from a handful to 20, each bringing their own dreams and struggles to their lessons. The restaurant had started special evening events where she both served and performed, creating an intimate atmosphere that guests said they'd never experienced anywhere else. Backstage, she met other performers, professional musicians who had played in concert halls around the world. To her surprise, they treated her like one of their own, asking about her unique journey from waitress to pianist. "You're living every musician's dream," one told her, making music that touches real people in their everyday lives. As she waited for her turn to perform, Mai peeked through the curtain. The amphitheater was packed. She spotted familiar faces from the restaurant, scattered throughout the crowd, the regulars who had become like family, supporting her at every step. Mr. Wu had closed the restaurant for the day so the entire staff could attend. In the front row sat her piano students, including the young girl who had almost quit playing. Next to them were her brothers, wearing suits for the first time since her mother's surgery. And there was Ray, giving her a thumbs up just like he had on that first night she performed. When the announcer called her name, Mai walked onto the stage with steady steps. The grand piano waited for her, gleaming in the afternoon sun. As she sat down, she remembered something her first piano teacher had told her. Music isn't about being perfect, it's about being true. She had chosen to play an original composition, something she'd been working on late at night after her shifts. It was called The Long Way Home, and it told her story, not in words, but in melodies that spoke of dreams set aside but never forgotten, of ordinary days filled with unexpected beauty, of finding your way back to yourself. As she played, memories flooded through her. The weight of plates balanced on her arm, the sound of coffee cups clinking, the quiet moments cleaning tables late at night. She wove them all into the music, transforming everyday moments into something magical. The piece built to a crescendo that felt like sunrise breaking through clouds. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of complete silence before the applause began, rolling through the amphitheater like thunder. Later that evening, back at the restaurant, Mr. Wu had organized a small celebration. As Mai looked around at the familiar faces, her coworkers who had become friends, her students who were now pursuing their own dreams, her family who had supported her through everything, she realized something important. You know, she said to her mother, I always thought I had to choose between being a waitress and being a musician. But life isn't always about either slash or. Sometimes it's about finding your own way to be both. The next morning, she was back at work, serving coffee and taking orders. But now there was a small sign on the piano that read, Evening performances by our own May. She had turned down offers to play exclusively at fancy venues, choosing instead to create something unique, a place where music and everyday life could come together. A new customer asked her once, Don't you want to be famous? Play in big concert halls. Mai smiled as she refilled his coffee cup. I am exactly where I want to be, she said. Some people play music in grand concert halls. I play it where people live their lives, fall in love, share meals with friends. Every place has its own kind of magic. That evening, as the sun set and the dinner crowd began to arrive, May changed from her serving apron into her performance dress. She had learned that dreams don't always come true in the way we expect. Sometimes they come true in a better way, not by leaving our old lives behind, but by bringing everything we love together, creating something entirely new.